is a setup where we're going to measure the energy that's stored in the springs and the stiffness property of each spring. So here we're taking one of the extension springs in the kit, and we have a setup here where we can simply hang the spring onto it and then hang weights from it. I'm going to start here with a 250 gram weight, and I'm going to put it onto the spring. And then I'm going to take a ruler here and I'm going to measure the length at which the spring is extended. I can use any point on the hanging body as long as I'm consistent. And here I'm going to use the top of the can. And I measured that distance here. And the reason that we can use any length is because really I'm interested in the change in distance that corresponds to the change in force. So now I'm going to use the 500 gram weight. I'm going to put it on here. And now I can measure a new distance that would correspond to that, and now I have a change in distance corresponding to a change in load applied on the spring. But also, whenever I make an experimental measurement, I always like to do it in more than one way. And in this case, we can use the natural frequency of a spring mass system. Here, if we take this spring and we just oscillate it back and forth, I could measure with my stopwatch how long it would take for, say, a number of oscillations and get the period. Once I know the mass and the period, I can calculate the stiffness of the spring. Now, to get the complete energy in the spring, I need to know how long I could deform the spring before it would permanently deform. For the metal springs in your kit, we don't want you to destroy those springs. So the TAs have actually done that for you. They've determined the maximum operating length of the springs, and you can simply look that up here in terms of the maximum length. One other thing with the subtlety, that even something as simple as measuring a spring can have subtleties. We notice this is an extension spring, and if I hang a small amount of weight onto it, the length of the spring does not change. You can notice here, if I remove the weight, I'm really not changing the length of the spring. And the reason is because there's pre-tension in the springs, so the coils are compressed against each other. So when I begin to add a little bit of weight at a time, I will get no motion until I exceed the pre-tension. At that point, the spring will indeed extend in a more linear fashion corresponding to the load that's on it. So when I'm measuring the spring stiffness, I want to make sure that I have enough weight so that I separate the coils in there. And in fact, when I'm looking at the total energy in the spring, really my effective working length of the spring only begins after the pre-tension load, and the initial rest position, the theoretical rest position of the spring, is actually slightly lower than the total length of the spring, because the contact between the coils prevents the spring from retracting all the way to the point where there would be no pre-tension. A lot of interesting things, even in a simple thing such as a spring.